absolutely no getting away or hiding from the fact that extreme weather events are here to stay and will only get worse before they eventually, we are hoping, get better. So how do we prevent airport collapses, flooding of tunnels or caving in of newly built expressways? Welcome everyone to the Urban Agenda. I'm Manisha Natarajan. Can we climate-proof India's infrastructure? If yes, what must we do to ensure that the country's infrastructure is built to last? Let's get insights from two distinguished experts. We have with us Suresh Subudhi, Managing Director and Global Leader, Travel, Cities and Infrastructure, BCG. Suresh has led numerous transformative projects worldwide and his expertise spans infrastructure, development, urban planning and public policy, making him a sought-after advisor in the industry. Suresh, very warm welcome to you and thank you for making the time.
Good to be here, Manisha.
Also with me is Shailesh Pathak, an infrastructure expert and urbanist, as he calls himself lately, with over 3 decades of experience spanning government and private sectors. He has served as an IAS officer managing significant infrastructure projects and later led large companies such as L&T infrastructure development projects. Shailesh and Suresh have both authored several articles and publications on this exact matter. Suresh, let me start with you. I know that you've got one foot in Dubai, one in New Delhi. Both these cities have seen heaviest rainfalls in 75 years, but today's focus is on India infrastructure. So let's start with the recent airport damage of the capital, T1. You know, initial investigations are suggesting that there was a lapse in construction quality, oversight by private contractors who were actually responsible for not only building but also maintaining the roof section. And you've said or questioned the PPP or public-private participation model that India follows for infrastructure development. Can you tell us what are the gaps in it and what do we do about it? Because it's not an easy thing to change.
Let me start with a broader picture on the relevance of the topic which we are discussing. I think if you look at what is happening in India and you fast forward till 2047, we have a potential to become a $30 trillion economy. Right now, what will be the economic construct of that economy? 70 to 75% of the economic engine will be urban areas, and close to about 50% of the population will be living in urban areas. So, urban resilience is not an option, but a must. Now, if you zoom into what is happening in India and what is going to increasingly happen, if you look at the climate risk index, we are among the top 10 countries globally of the 195 countries worldwide in terms of climate risk, right? We rank very high. Now, if you look at the number of districts, 806 districts, 600 districts are in extreme weather condition zone, and that is going to get magnified as we go into the future. Now, they are in hotspots. If you look at IPCC report, it talks about 12 of our large cities, major portions of that will be underwater, right? So what we have seen in the past and what we will see in the future is going to be extremely different. You look at monsoons, the number of dry days have increased, but number of days outside of monsoons, single day rainfalls have dramatically gone up, right? It's extremely difficult that somebody would have planned for it 20, 25, 30 or 40 years ago. Extremely difficult because nobody would have imagined this kind of wider variations in climatic conditions.
Right.
But now that we are seeing this, now that we're experiencing this, now is the time for us to change and act, whether it be from private sector or public sector. It's extremely important that now that we have witnessed what is happening in extreme weather events, we need to act to dramatically change the urban resilience, the infrastructure resilience of our critical infrastructure like airports, roads, tunnels, bridges, especially given where we stand with respect to the climate risk index as a country.
All right, so you made that opening statement with statistics which are actually nerve-wracking and also shake us a bit, a great start to it. As an urbanist, what's your take? Yes, we couldn't prepare ourselves maybe in the past, right? Because we have not foreseen such extreme events, what Suresh is saying. But anything we built in the last 5-10 years, and this Terminal 1 airport was built in 2008-9, I mean, the climate risks were quite evident. It was refurbished in 2023.
Let me agree with both Suresh and you. and say that the one number that most people don't remember is that, it's only 100 hours when nearly 90% of the rainfall falls in India. In any Indian city, out of 365 days into 24 hours, it's 100 hours when rainfall is concentrated in most Indian cities. What capacity do you design your stormwater drains for? It's like pouring a bucket of water in your basin. It will take time to empty. Do you design the basin to be 10 times the size so that you can pour a bucket of water? Probably not. And that's why, I always say that there are 4 stages of infrastructure. Design, finance, because without money you're not going to get anything, construct and operate. And in many ways, the orphan among these 4 stages is design. And maybe as we prepare for Amrit Kal, for India up till 2047, we need to invest much more, both in terms of capacity, resources and money, into the design phase. To go back to your example.
To make it climate resilient.
To make it climate resilient, among other things. Just to specifically talk about this roof collapse. Actually, the terminal was designed well. It is the overhanging roof over the porch where the cars come for arrival, which was not designed with adequate strength. And even then, when the water had collected, as long as the water keeps draining, you don't have a problem. Because the water had collected, the structural stability went for a toss. These are the design elements that we need to talk about.
Okay. All right. So let's come to breaking it down on who really commissions an infrastructure project in urban India, who executes it from design to completion, management and operation. And that is, again, I'm going back to the PPP model. Government cannot do it all. You need private contractors and private companies to deliver it. Suresh, come in here and tell us what are the flaws in this chain of custody.
I think we need to do 4 or 5 things. Look, first of all, we need to acknowledge that it's not that many countries have gotten it right, and we are the ones who have not gotten it right? So it's an evolving paradigm on how do we improve the resilience of infrastructure in many of our cities. I think we should do 4 or 5 things. One is what gets measured gets done. So we need to be able to measure resilience. We need to come up with a standard for infrastructure resilience. It's not yet a worldwide or global standard which is readily available that we can adopt. But as we have spearheaded CDRI, can we as a country spearhead the creation of a resilience index which measures airports, ports, roads on where do they stand with respect to withstanding the extreme weather events? That's number 1.
Okay.
Number 2, it's high time we create a national adaptation plan integrated with a sub-national adaptation plan, at least for our top 100 most vulnerable areas, with a very tightly linked integrated adaptation plan. Once we have a plan, then we can measure whether we are going as per the plan or whether we are from the plan. That's number 2. Okay. Number 3, I agree with Shailesh what he's saying as to how our stormwater channels and drainage systems should be created. But I also think that we have to move towards the concept of sponge cities, which is nature-based solutions in at least 50 of our most vulnerable cities to be able to retain 75% of our rainwater, to be able to mandate 50% of new buildings to be green buildings. 4th, I would say, look, we have massive missions like Gati Shakti or the National Infrastructure Plan. We're going to spend about $1.5 trillion over the next 8 to 10 years in infrastructure. We need to earmark at least 10 to 15%, so about $150 billion in infrastructure resilience. And the last point which you mentioned and which you alluded to is the capacity, the skill level, the knowledge level in design. I don't think it exists in many parts of the world, and that skill is rare and that skill is in high demand. So we also need to work towards upgrading our designers and engineers to keep various parameters into consideration as they design new infrastructure, but also there will have to be a massive retrofitting wave of existing infrastructure as we upgrade them to withstand extreme conditions. So all of these will be I would say, the action agenda as we move forward.
All right. Shailesh, you've seen the government side, you've seen the private sector. Tell me, how does this work? I mean, these are solutions that we are aware of, though between the two of you, I think you've broken them down in very simplified and direct manner. Who should do what? I mean, Who takes the lead in it?
There are broadly two kinds of infrastructure, very broadly. One is linear infrastructure, which is like the high-speed rail connecting Mumbai and Ahmedabad. The other is spatial infrastructure, which could be a city center redevelopment. Right? Linear infrastructure is much easier in terms of climate resilience because if you've traveled on rail, it's always on the high ridge line. Right? So you take the 100-year flooding and you design the rail alignment or even the highway on the highest possible ridge. This is not so easy in spatial infrastructure because cities have been around for quite some time and will be around for far more. So why is this important to make climate resilient infrastructure? And CDRI, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, actually is an Indian creation. So we should demonstrate to the world, not only the rich West, but also the upcoming rest of the world, how we can disaster-proof and climate-proof our cities. But we need to invest in design. Today, since you asked who owns what, the public-private partnership model versus the government procurement model, the only change is actually who is raising the money. I've been Secretary Public Works Department. I've handed out contracts to private contractors. I've been L&T IDPL CEO. I've handed out contracts from the private sector. Who raises the money is the big question, and who manages the contract better. And in my book, it is very simple. 2011, I was quoted in The Economist magazine saying, you build with government money, and once the cash flows are generated, you spin it off to the private sector. So there's nothing wrong with the private-public partnership model, except which stage you implement it in. Specifically, on climate proofing, let's say a city like Mumbai, there are a lot of operational assets in Mumbai with cash flows, which actually don't need to be run by the government, which can be happily run by the private sector. This is the model actually for most of the OECD countries. Operational assets are with the private sector and consequent efficiencies. But when you design infrastructure, the early stage, it is always better for the sovereign to design it properly, to raise the money, to get the construction done. In my book, I call it a transition between a caterpillar to a butterfly. Caterpillar better with government, butterfly better with the private sector.
Wow. Suresh, your views on this one. Come in.
I think the question is actually not PPP or PPP. I think the question is the design standards, the master plan, and the measurement to the design standards and the master plan which we have created, which will withstand extreme weather events, right? Now, the master planning typically in a particular city is led by the city agency, of course, in consultation with the broader state agencies and authorities. So they have to hold what is the future master plan of a particular city going to look like, keeping in mind the weather events, right? And then they have to build those in the standards for development, and then they have to monitor and measure whether the development are as per those standards and whether the projects are as per what the master plan is. So, of course, government as a custodian has to own the master plan. But having said that, it's not that we have many examples, except for few, for example, countries like Japan or Netherlands, where they have witnessed events long past in history that they have matured enough to reach a stage where they create master plans that are clever enough to manage such kind of events. We have to learn from them, but we also have the opportunity to potentially lead the global south in creating the standards in the resilience index we talked about, in creating a dedicated fund towards resilience, and creating a national and a subnational adaptation plan, and launching a massive capacity building exercise in our engineering community, in our designing community, in our architectural community, to be able to grasp with what is going to happen in the future.
Gentlemen, stay with me. This is a very important dialogue that we are having on climate proofing India's urban infrastructure. There's much more to talk about on the other side of the break. not fun to see the country's capital, New Delhi, becoming a trending joke and a meme on the internet with the recent collapse of its infrastructure, be it key airport terminal or flooding of the city. Now, these incidents only highlight the growing impact of extreme weather events on urban infrastructure. I have two leaders with deep insights into the matter to tell us what we must do as a country. Suresh Subudhi from BCG and Shailesh Pathak, an urbanist and an infrastructure expert. Now, before we carry the discussion forward, here's a quick look at India's cost of climate resilience. And this is by RBI. The projected adaptation cost, RBI says, is about 85.6 lakh crore or $1 trillion by 2030. Now, potential damage without resilient strategies, annual damages could exceed 4 lakh crore or $50 billion again by 2030. It's also important to note that India gets highest impact of any climate disaster. Its economic losses, affected population and fatalities, which means deaths, have ranked the highest between 2019 and 2023 in South Asia from climate disasters in all of South Asia. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to give me 3 takeaways of what can we do immediately and what do we need to do in the long term to basically climate-proof our cities.
So from a private sector perspective, we should start a mapping of areas prone to flooding in cities, which drive down real estate costs in those areas. So the market will find a solution saying people will not want to buy real estate in that area. I don't see that happening right now. And there's some smart entrepreneur out there who's going to make a lot of money with this. Take a city like Bengaluru. If you can map which cities, which areas in Bengaluru get flooded, we won't buy real estate there. That's the first. The second is the climate resilience index, not only for India, but much of the South, which the CDRI can take a lead in. And the third is, we just looked at the Reserve Bank numbers. The cost of climate proofing is going to be a fraction of the project cost. And that needs to be specifically provided for in the DPR stage, the design stage.
All right. Suresh, your concluding remark.
You showed us the RBI figures, and there are various estimates of what's the impact on the GDP if we don't make our urban areas resilient, right? Some figures are close to about 4.5% of GDP will get impacted because of extreme weather events. Now, my view on the private sector specifically here is to look at this as a great area of opportunity. If you look at businesses which are around sustainable businesses which do climate related activities, whether it is in design, engineering or execution or nature based solutions or even circularity, you look at the kind of valuation those companies are getting. So there is already enough incentivization from capital markets, from low cost funding sources, from both the social stature of the kind of work which you do. There is enough incentivization which already exists in the market construct as we operate today for private sector to rise and take this as an opportunity. Similarly, on the public sector side, we have already talked about whether it is the resilience index, dedication of a substantial amount of money specifically for climate proofing, building the engineering and the design capability and capacity, and this whole spun city concept I'm very passionate about. Umpteen amount of stormwater or drainage solutions will not be able to manage the kind of weather fiascos we'll see in future. You will have to create more green roofs. You will have to create green sanctuaries within the cities to be able to absorb that water, to be able to retain 75% of the water. Because we have, in one situation, we have extreme water and similarly in that same year, you have extreme heat and shortage, right? So you need to be able to balance the entire thing. So nature-based solutions have to be integrated in how the public sector thinks about master planning and development of our cities.
Well, that's a very insightful wrap from both of you to a very important discussion. Shailesh and Suresh, thank you very much for joining me. And to all of you, my audience, thank you so much. I hope you watch this important discussion and have some important takeaways. Goodbye.